I want you to think about the last time you clicked buy online. You know the drill, right? You probably had, I don't know, a dozen tabs open, you were frantically comparing reviews, looking at 3 different unboxing videos, and then finally, you made a decision.
Right. It takes forever.
Yeah, and then you click one single button. To you, the buyer, it is incredibly simple. It's entirely frictionless. But behind that single, simple checkout button lies this massive, completely invisible power structure that is dictating every single step of the process.
Oh, absolutely. It truly is a modern marvel of, logistics and code. But you have to remember that it's also an immense system of control. What feels like a direct one-to-one transaction between you and a seller is actually heavily, heavily mediated by the platform standing between you.
Right, and that mediation, that quiet control over everything you see and buy, well, that is the core focus of our analysis today. We are taking a very close look at China's proposed e-commerce law.
Which is a huge deal.
It really is. Now, the goal of this analysis is to unpack how this draft law signals a massive global shift. We're moving away from an era of simply regulating a transaction, a buyer giving money to a seller, to a future of governing an entire digital ecosystem.
Okay, let's unpack this because it sounds like we're talking about fundamentally rewiring how the internet economy actually works.
Yeah, we are. We're basically looking at a complete architectural rewrite. And it's crucial to establish the stakes right here at the beginning. Yes, this is currently a proposed law. It's a draft, meaning the exact wording, the specific enforcement tools, the commercial consequences, all of that will likely change before it's formally finalized.
Sure, that makes sense.
But the underlying message of this document, that represents a permanent shift in philosophy. I mean, for the longest time, the operating model for platform economies was just growth at all costs.
Right, move fast and break things.
Exactly. The overriding singular objective was scale. But this framework signals that growth is no longer the only acceptable metric, which is a massive pivot for the tech world. So to understand why the rules of the game are changing so drastically, we first need to expose exactly what is happening behind that checkout button we just talked about. I mean, the sheer scope of what is being regulated here is rapidly expanding.
It really is. Historically, if you looked at a marketplace, the legal framework was actually quite narrow. Regulators focused almost exclusively on this simple, direct relationship between the marketplace operator and the seller.
Like if you sold a fake watch, they just took it down.
Yeah, very straightforward. If you break a rule, you get banned. But the new direction reaches much, much further. It extends toward the wider platform economy as this one interconnected whole.
Okay, so we aren't just talking about the digital storefront anymore. We are talking about the entire supply chain and the software that runs it. And when you think about it, that ecosystem is vast. I mean, it's the algorithms that are quietly deciding which product you even get to see on page one.
Absolutely.
It's the platform determining exactly how much visibility a specific merchant receives on any given day.
Yeah, and it also includes the payment systems that process your credit card, the physical warehouses that actually store the inventory, the delivery networks that determine if that 2-day shipping promise is actually kept.
Oh, and even the return policies, right?
Exactly. The policies that ultimately decide who absorbs the financial loss if you just, change your mind and send a sweater back.
Right, which brings us to the core tension here. When one single company controls all of those functions, the search ranking, the advertising rules, the financial penalties, the physical warehouses, and the access to internet traffic, its private rules effectively override the public laws of the land.
Yeah.
I mean, thinking about this, it kind of reminds me of virtual sovereign country.
Wow, yeah. That is an incredibly accurate way to visualize it.
Oh, let me play devil's advocate for a second. Aren't these just private tech companies? Why should they be forced to act like public utilities or governments just because they built a really popular app? If I build a mall, I get to decide who rents the stores, right?
It's a fair question. But the difference is the sheer scale and the inescapable nature of their infrastructure. A local mall doesn't dictate the entire retail economy of a nation. These platforms do. They essentially issue their own laws through their terms of service.
Right, those massive documents nobody reads.
Exactly. And they collect their own taxes in the form of what the industry calls take rates. That's a percentage cut the platform automatically deducts from every single sale a merchant makes. And they completely control their own borders, which in this case is the digital traffic.
Because if they turn off the traffic, your store is dead.
Right. If they tweak the algorithm to bury your product on page 50, your business simply ceases to exist.
So they have basically become the market itself.
Precisely. And this framework validates that exact perspective. The central message here is that businesses that benefit from running platform commerce are now going to inherit the responsibility for its consequences.
Ah, I see.
If you act as the foundational infrastructure of the economy, you have to govern like infrastructure.
Yeah.
You cannot just claim to be a neutral host anymore. So the focus is shifting heavily toward maintaining economic order, ensuring fair treatment of those merchants paying the take rates, and mandating strict consumer protection.
That really makes me think of the consequences of the convenience we've all grown so used to. Because if this new push is all about enforcing responsibility, it strongly implies there is a lot of irresponsibility happening right now.
Oh, there absolutely is.
I'll give you a personal example. So a few months ago, I bought a ridiculously cheap phone charger online. It cost maybe $3 free shipping. I plugged it in, and within an hour, the plastic actually started melting.
Oh, wow. That's terrifying.
Yeah, it was a massive fire hazard, but it was so cheap I just threw it away and didn't even bother returning it.
Well, that melting charger is the perfect physical manifestation of the old, unregulated system. For years, the dominant strategy for these platforms was this relentless cash-burning race. It was a race to acquire customers, to recruit as many merchants as possible, to heavily subsidize delivery costs, and to just monetize your attention.
And that race successfully created massive scale, but that scale clearly created an immense amount of pressure behind the scenes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, we all know that lower prices benefit consumers on paper. Faster delivery creates this incredible convenience we've come to demand. Constant, never-ending promotions expand access to goods. But the economic reality of that system is that someone, somewhere in the chain, always has to pay for that convenience.
Right. It's the ultimate illusion of a free lunch. We get so-called free shipping, but it's obviously not free to put a physical box on an airplane and fly it across the country.
No, it's not. Let's walk through the actual mechanics of a forced promotion to see who actually pays. Imagine a small merchant selling a basic t-shirt. They manufacture it for $5, they sell it for $15. That $10 of profit has to cover their staff, their rent, and the platform's take rate.
Okay, pretty standard.
Now, the platform decides it wants to run a site-wide summer flash sale to boost user numbers. They essentially force the merchant to offer a mandatory 30% discount if they want their store to remain visible.
So the shirt drops from $15 to roughly $10.
Right, but the platform still charges its take rate, the shipping company still charges to move the box, and the warehouse still charges for storage. Suddenly, that merchant is making zero profit, or even taking a loss on every single sale.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, they are losing their margins just to stay alive on the platform. The suppliers further down the chain face tougher terms because the merchant begs them for cheaper materials. And the workers in the warehouses face incredibly tight productivity targets to keep costs down.
And to tie it back to my story, the merchant is eventually forced to use cheaper, highly flammable plastic in a phone charger just to survive the platform's mandatory price cuts.
Exactly.
So I want you, the listener, to really think about your own shopping habits for a second. We all love a good deal. We love watching prices drop. But as consumers, we have to ask, is this law actually trying to stop things from being cheap?
Well, the core policy question being asked by this framework is no longer simply, are prices falling? That used to be the only metric of success. Regulators used to look at falling prices and say, great, the consumer is winning.
Right.
But the new, much more sophisticated question is, who is absorbing the cost of those falling prices?
Because if the merchant is absorbing it until they go completely bankrupt, that is not a healthy, sustainable market.
Exactly. Unsustainable price wars eventually hurt the consumer anyway. When a business model becomes completely unviable because prices are artificially suppressed by a platform algorithm, the consumer ultimately pays the price through weaker product quality, like your melting charger, or highly misleading pricing tactics.
That makes total sense.
A truly healthy marketplace isn't one where every single seller is forced into a permanent, desperate price war just to get visibility on a screen. A healthy marketplace is one where merchants have enough margin to actually invest in their products, to innovate, to maintain basic safety standards, and to, survive beyond the next algorithmic flash sale.
Okay, so if this unregulated system is actively crushing merchants and putting dangerous products in our homes, you would logically assume that these new regulations are going to swoop in, level the playing field, and basically save the little guy, right? But this leads us to a fascinating, entirely unintended consequence.
Yeah, and to understand that consequence, we have to look at how this proposed law demands a unified approach. Regulators are realizing they have to cover both online operations and physical offline reality.
Because you can't just regulate the software code and ignore the physical warehouses where the goods are actually sitting.
Right. If oversight focuses exclusively on the digital app, businesses will simply shift their risks and bad practices out of the digital spotlight. They'll just hide the risk in the physical world.
Okay, walk me through how that actually works. How exactly does a tech platform hide a digital risk in a physical warehouse?
Let's say a new digital regulation forces a platform to make its search algorithm completely fair and transparent. The platform complies. When you search for a coffee mug, the algorithm displays a small third-party merchant right next to the platform's own white label brand of coffee mugs. Digitally, it looks perfectly fair.
Okay, makes sense.
But in the physical warehouse, which the platform also owns, the management quietly instructs the packing robots and warehouse workers to prioritize shipping the platform's own merchandise first.
Wow, wait, really? So the third-party merchant's mug just sits on a shelf for 3 days, their shipping gets delayed, the customer leaves a bad review, and the merchant's business still gets crushed.
Exactly. The anti-competitive behavior was just moved from the software code to the forklift. This is why the new framework demands a unified approach to close all of those loopholes across the entire supply chain. But to achieve that level of total oversight, compliance has to become a permanent daily operating cost. It requires massive data reporting, constant auditing, and total supply chain transparency.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. Let's use an analogy to understand what happens next. Imagine your town decides to build a massively expensive, incredibly high-tech safety fence around a local playground. You want to perfectly protect all the kids inside from any possible danger. So you install laser tripwires, security guards, biometric scanners, the works.
A very safe playground.
Right. It is perfectly flawlessly safe. But the daily cost of maintaining that incredible fence is so phenomenally high that the town has to charge a massive entrance fee just to keep the lights on. You accidentally ensure that only the absolute wealthiest kids can afford to even enter the playground.
Yeah.
By trying to protect everyone, you created an exclusionary fortress. So, are these massive new e-commerce rules going to accidentally do the exact same thing?
What's fascinating here is that this is the exact contrarian risk of heavy regulation. It's a well-documented economic phenomenon. More regulation does not automatically translate to more competition. In fact, it often achieves the exact opposite. We call it a compliance moat.
A moat, like around a castle. It keeps the invaders out.
Yes. Look at the current landscape. Large established tech platforms have entire armies of corporate lawyers. They have massive internal compliance teams, thousands of software engineers dedicated just to data reporting, internal auditors, and critically, they have bottomless pools of capital. When a massive new rulebook drops, they can easily afford to build the infrastructure to adapt to it.
But the smaller platforms, the startups trying to disrupt them, they can't.
Small, emerging digital businesses simply do not have the resources to hire 50 compliance officers on day one. We saw this exact dynamic play out in Europe with GDPR.
Oh, the massive data privacy law.
Exactly. It was designed to rein in giant tech monopolies. But because the compliance costs were so astronomical, smaller advertising and tech firms actually went out of business. And the giant tech monopolies gained market share because they were the only ones who could afford the lawyers to navigate the new rules.
So the bearish case for this Chinese e-commerce law is incredibly ironic. If the new rules are highly complex, overlapping, and intensely costly to implement, the massive companies that are already dominant will become utterly untouchable.
Yep.
I mean, a law explicitly intended to limit the power of giant platforms could accidentally raise the barriers to entry so high that it forever protects those incumbents from new competition. The cost of just playing by the rules becomes the ultimate weapon.
It's true. It forces regulators to confront a very uncomfortable question. Does this new framework actually make digital commerce fairer for everyone, or does it simply make market entry too expensive for anyone new to try?
And this tension, this massive high-wire act between regulating domestic platforms and accidentally turning them into unassailable monopolies, it isn't staying contained within China's borders. If these companies conquer their domestic market and are protected by a compliance moat, they have to look outward for growth. They are actively spilling out onto the global stage.
Oh, definitely. This international expansion is a critical evolution. China's e-commerce strategy is no longer a purely domestic affair. We're seeing Chinese merchants, massive digital marketplaces, specialized logistics providers, and payment systems aggressively competing in North America, Europe, and Latin America.
But achieving global scale instantly introduces a massive amount of global friction. When you cross a sovereign border, you run headfirst into an entirely new set of rules. Foreign regulators care deeply about things like product safety. They don't want melting phone chargers either.
Right. Nobody wants that.
And they care about consumer rights, customs compliance, taxation, data privacy, aggressive competition laws, all of it.
And the proposed law directly addresses this friction. It emphasizes international alignment. It pushes for industry self-regulation and orderly overseas expansion, while also seeking to provide legal protection for Chinese companies operating in those foreign jurisdictions.
So if we connect this to the bigger picture,
But connect this to the bigger picture. You realize this is not just some minor compliance detail buried in a dry legal text. This is a massive geopolitical signal.
okay, how so?
For decades, the biggest hurdle in global e-commerce was physical logistics. It was the shipping cost. The whole game was figuring out how cheaply we could get a shipping container across the Pacific Ocean. But the global choke point in e-commerce has fundamentally shifted. It's no longer simply shipping costs or supply chain speed. The ultimate choke point is now regulatory trust.
Regulatory trust, meaning does the destination country actually trust the platform moving the goods across its borders?
Exactly.
Yeah.
A cross-border platform can possess the most advanced logistics network on the planet. They can have the capacity to move 10 million parcels a day with frightening efficiency. But they absolutely cannot build durable, long-term access to foreign markets if the regulators, the local consumers, and the domestic business partners in those markets believe the platform's governance is unreliable.
Right.
If foreign governments look at a platform and see a black box of data harvesting, forced merchant discounts, and counterfeit goods, they will eventually shut it down or just tax it out of existence.
So China appears to be building what we could call a dual-track model. On one track, you have much stronger domestic governance at home, forcing these companies to clean up their bad practices, protect merchants, ensure product safety. And on the other track, you have greater legal support and coordination for those same platforms to expand abroad.
Which leads to a very strong, bullish case for these companies on the global stage. Think about the mechanics of this. If they are forced to completely clean up their act at home, if they improve their merchant standards, eliminate all that destructive price war competition, and genuinely strengthen consumer trust, these platforms suddenly have a highly defensible, incredibly credible case when they expand internationally.
Oh, I see.
They can walk into a skeptical foreign market and say, hey, look at our rigorous domestic compliance standards. Look at the consumer protections we have built into our core architecture.
They're essentially exporting trust. Instead of just exporting cheap goods using what the industry calls opaque traffic tactics, which is really just a polite way of saying things like buying fake reviews, manipulating search results, or hiding the true origin of a product to trick the algorithm, they're forced to build a better, more transparent business model, and that actually makes them more competitive globally.
That is the ideal bullish outcome. But we do have to balance that optimism with the bearish outcome we discussed earlier. These broader international obligations could just become another massive layer of uncertainty.
Right, because compliance costs rise across the board.
Exactly. Enforcement of these rules might vary wildly from region to region. Smaller merchants lose the flexibility they desperately need to survive the transition, and the large incumbents gain a massive structural advantage because they're the only entities capable of absorbing the heavy financial burden of playing on this newly regulated global stage.
It really is a massive, ground-up reorganization of the entire digital economy. So bringing all these complex threads together, we need to figure out what actually happens next. When a platform transitions from a digital Wild West into heavily regulated public infrastructure, who actually wins and who loses?
Well, if the bullish scenario plays out, the potential winners are pretty clear. First, the consumers, who will receive much better data protections and significantly higher quality goods, free from that race-to-the-bottom manufacturing.
No more melting chargers.
Exactly. Second, the merchants, who will finally gain more predictable rules, transparent algorithms, and a real chance to build sustainable profit margins, instead of just surviving the next mandatory flash sale. And third, the platforms themselves, specifically the ones with strong internal compliance systems, reliable physical logistics networks, diversified revenue streams, and patient capital that doesn't demand hypergrowth at all costs.
And on the flip side, the losers are going to be the businesses that are entirely dependent on those opaque traffic tactics we discussed. The platform is built entirely on permanent subsidy wars, burning billions in venture capital just to offer artificially cheap goods. The merchants relying on algorithmic loopholes rather than actual product quality. And unfortunately, the smaller, innovative digital firms that simply cannot afford to hire the lawyers required to navigate a much more demanding rulebook.
The deeper issue here isn't just about whether this specific draft law is good or bad for one particular tech company. The issue is whether heavy regulation can actually force the creation of a more durable, sustainable profit model for the entire global internet economy.
And to figure out if that transition is actually happening, you need to know what to watch. So, I am going to give you the 5 specific indicators to keep an eye on as this massive shift unfolds over the next few years. Number 1, merchant take rates. Are the major platforms squeezing sellers more to cover their own compliance costs, or are those digital taxes finally stabilizing?
Yeah, that one is crucial.
Number 2, promotional spending. Are we still seeing endless cash-burning price wars, or are platforms finally starting to compete on service and quality?
Right, which ties right into number 3.
Exactly. Number 3 is compliance costs. Are these massive new rules acting as a healthy filter to keep bad actors out, or are they just functioning as an impossible barrier to entry that protects monopolies?
We really have to watch the small businesses on that one.
For sure. Number 4 is consumer trust. Do buyers actually feel safer and more confident in the digital ecosystem? And number 5, cross-border execution. Can these platforms take their newly regulated, cleaned-up domestic models and successfully convince foreign regulators to grant them long-term access?
Those are absolutely the metrics that matter. If merchant economics stabilize while platform revenues remain resilient, the entire sector could become significantly healthier. But if those destructive price wars continue in the shadows while visible compliance costs rise, the law may just add massive friction without actually fixing the underlying imbalances in the market. China is no longer just asking how fast these digital platforms can grow. It's asking who carries the ultimate responsibility when private software becomes the fundamental economic infrastructure of a society.
Such a huge shift.
It really is. The next generation of winners in global commerce may not be the platforms that can generate the most raw traffic. They may be the platforms that can figure out how to turn that traffic into absolute trust, how to turn their massive scale into genuine accountability, and how to turn their global reach into durable long-term permission to operate anywhere in the world. Which actually brings up a really fascinating final thought for you to mull over.
Oh, what's that?
Well, we spent this entire analysis talking about how expensive, difficult, and burdensome these new regulations are for businesses. But what if we flip that perspective entirely?
Okay, I'm listening.
The future of global commerce won't be decided at the simple checkout button on your screen, but by who writes the invisible rules behind it. If these massive regulatory shifts successfully force companies to turn cheap traffic into absolute undeniable trust, could heavy government compliance, which is almost always viewed by the tech world as a massive burden, actually become the ultimate impenetrable competitive advantage for the tech giants of the future. If you are the only company in the world wealthy enough to afford the armor stops being a weight that slows you down, and it starts being a weapon you use against everyone else.
Wow. Now that is something worth keeping a very close eye on. Thank you for joining us for this analysis. We really love unpacking these massive structural shifts with you. Keep watching those 5 indicators, stay curious, and we will catch you next time as we continue to decode the systems shaping our world.